Putin has kind of cornered himself by being a coward. He basically judges everyone by himself in his own image, and he basically thinks that if Ukraine is armed to the teeth, they will be tempted to retake Crimea or something like that. We haven't broken our international commitments once, so at that level. So I wouldn't say that we're going to do it, but I think the issue of the guarantees will be the determining factor here, even before territory.
Hi, I'm Crawford, and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today, I'm joined by Igor Novikov, former senior advisor to Zelensky, who oversaw US-Ukraine relations during the previous Donald Trump presidency. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you for inviting me again.
So I'd just like to hear your thoughts about what took place between those meetings between Trump and Putin, but then also the meeting that took place between Trump, Zelensky, and European leaders. What were your thoughts from that?
Let's try and unpack it. So the meeting in Alaska, it was, I wouldn't say it was too effective. I think, Putin got what he wanted. So he was legitimized again. He got to visit the US soil, especially the optics of that arrival and, the American soldiers kneeling to roll out the red carpet to, the present day bin Laden. That was tough to watch for everyone, especially for the Ukrainians. But at the same time, if we look at the meeting that took place in Washington, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. So the meeting between Zelensky and Trump was way more positive than the one in February. Luckily, there are no, dress code issues this time, no provocations, nothing. And I wouldn't be too optimistic to say that we're kind of definitely on the road to a ceasefire or peace. And I'll explain why ceasefire is also an option here, although many top-level politicians seem to deny it. I wouldn't say that we're like on that road just yet because, China hasn't said its word yet. And I think China is a major factor here. And also, the Russian intentions need to be seen through the lens of their actions. And, even on the night of that meeting between the European leaders, between Zelensky and Trump, Russia fired cruise missiles at Ukraine, at the Poltava region, destroying some of the natural gas infrastructure. So, whether we're on the road to peace or not remains to be seen, but definitely a lot more cause for optimism than before.
And when you said that you think we might be on the road to potentially a ceasefire, that's interesting because it looked as though Trump had done this U-turn on a ceasefire, said that you don't need a ceasefire in order to achieve peace. But he also had a U-turn on the sanctions as well.
Well, let me explain the ceasefire issue here. A number of preconditions, especially the Russian preconditions, to do with the territory and a couple of others, including domestic politics in Ukraine, require, if not a referendum, then definitely a conversation with the Ukrainian people. Now, similar to the issue of the presidential parliamentary elections, first of all, martial law stands in the way, but that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that, unlike Russia, we do not hold elections and we do not hold referenda with missiles landing on our heads. So if, as a democratic country, in the spirit of true democracy, if we were to involve the Ukrainian people, and we must, we need to take into account their safety. We need to take into account the views of soldiers in the trenches, the refugees abroad, and so on and so forth. So, and that puts us in a very interesting paradox. So on one hand, everyone wants quick peace, but the preconditions for that peace require effectively a ceasefire in practice. So that could lead us to one of the two outcomes. Either, the question of a ceasefire reappears on the table between the parties at a later stage, or this seems like a Russian trap to delegitimize Zelensky and the Ukrainian government again.
And there's been talks about potentially being a meeting there between Zelensky and Putin, potentially happening by even the end of this month. What do you make of that? Do you think that that's possible?
I would say it's even probable, not possible. I think kudos to President Trump. He got the ball rolling there. A couple of things, there's a lot of talk about that meeting taking place in Budapest in Hungary. I, for one, would be strongly against that because Budapest was where in 1994 the US, Britain, and Russia signed previous batch of security guarantees for Ukraine, and those worked out a treat, as we all know. So maybe even for the history's sake, we need to think about different geography. Secondly, that meeting will be a tough meeting, and I'm not exactly happy that Trump is unlikely to be there, because one of the reasons the White House meeting went so well was because the difficult issues such as territory and so on and so forth have not been touched upon in great detail. Now, that's what Putin wants to discuss. And without a mediation between the two of them, the likelihood of an agreement there is quite low. That's issue number one. Issue number two, the lack of a third party, a mediator, puts Zelensky in a very difficult position, because he'll be one on one with the dictator, murderous dictator who killed hundreds of thousands of his countrymen, and it would take a lot of self-control to not do anything stupid in that situation. Well, stupid. I would do it and wouldn't call it stupid.
When you talk about a mediator, that Trump said he's kind of ruled himself out of being involved in a potential meeting between Putin and Zelensky. He said it would be better off if he's not there. Do you expect there to be some potential meetings after that, which involves Trump as well?
Yeah, I think we're also on the road for a trilat, and I don't necessarily think that Trump's made the wrong decision here not to be present during the first meeting, because of the complexity of the issues that are going to be discussed between Zelensky and Putin. The likelihood of an agreement there is very low, and therefore Trump is saving himself another try pretty much here. So the most realistic scenario is that Putin and Zelensky are going to meet. There might be some positives coming out of that meeting if the stars align, and by the stars I mean the US and China, because Putin is not an independent player here. He's highly dependent on China, and he hopes to play the US to kind of be less dependent on China. So that's what's going on. And basically, if the stars align, there might be some positives coming out of that meeting. But I still think that most likely it's the trialat and the later stages that will actually bring us to a ceasefire or peace closer in practice.
And what about security guarantees? Because there's talk about how the White House has agreed to some sort of security guarantee with Russia, which will involve the US providing some sort of NATO-style protection when fighting ends. But Trump's already ruled out there being US troops on the ground, but he has suggested that there could be like air support provided. What do we know so far about what potentially might be included?
Well, when it comes to President Trump and his administration, first of all, I wouldn't rely on him ruling anything out, not to kind of change his mind at a later stage. And let me remind you that half a year ago, when this whole process started, there was no question about security guarantees. Those were ruled out as well. If you still remember that minerals deal and everything. I'm not even mentioning Greenland or anything like that. So divide everything that President Trump says by 10 in terms of, the commitment for the long term. He likes to make deals, and deals involve flexibility. But I think, as far as the security guarantees are concerned, this war will not end without security guarantees for Ukraine. That's kind of my first point here. The second point is those guarantees should be tangible enough for the Ukrainian people to feel relatively safe that the situation will not repeat itself in a few years' time, if not sooner. Therefore, they will involve, if not troops on the ground, then rearming Ukraine. And that's a very sensitive issue for Russia, because Putin has kind of cornered himself by, being a coward. He basically judges everyone by himself in his own image, and he basically thinks that if Ukraine is armed to the teeth, it will be tempted to retake Crimea or something like that. We haven't broken our international commitments once, so at that level. So I wouldn't say that we're going to do it, but I think the issue of the guarantees will be the determining factor here, even before territory.
Trump also said that European nations are going to be taking a lot of the burden of these security guarantees too, but we don't know the full details. What do you think we can expect from that?
Well, for you, Trump kind of, it's always been his point. I remember when we first met him during his first term, the infamous phone call and everything. I was in the room as well. It was always kind of his position that Europe needs to do more for Ukraine and for NATO. So he's very consistent there. And he does have a point because, I mean, this war is closer to the European Union than to the US that has an ocean between itself and, the war. So I think Europe needs to do more, and I think it would be beneficial for Europe because despite all its advantages and, the positives, the European Union and all of the European institutions are way too slow, bureaucratic, and kind of um, too far away from reality for my liking. So I think Europe doing its part in providing that security for Ukraine will also be not only a good reality check but an instrument to unite Europe. So that's a good thing. I think if there are boots on the ground in Ukraine, most likely it will be European boots on the ground, and I would say Poland seems to be as our closest neighbor in that sense will be one of the first candidates for that role. But once again, I don't think we need boots on the ground, or else. There are other ways of providing security guarantees. And once again, let's not forget about China. I keep saying this in every single interview. Um, we're in the bipolar world at the moment, in every sense of the word, to be honest. But basically, China kind of needs to figure out what its role in this is and move away from a position where it doesn't want Russia to lose or win. So you kind of, they need to pick a side in a sense, and this war of attrition will remain the war of attrition until China kind of chooses one of the sides.
And what would you say is your gut feeling at the moment about the position that Ukraine's in terms of also how we expect Putin to respond over the next few weeks? If there is a bilateral meeting, what response can we expect from him? It was interesting. We heard Trump saying that we're going to find out about President Putin in the next couple of weeks. It sounds like he's uncertain himself, doesn't he?
Well, if I know Russia, they do have this doctrine of escalate to de-escalate. So one thing I'm certain of, tragically, is that Russia will be escalating, both on the front lines and in its terror attacks against Ukrainian civilians. I think, given the fact that today, for example, presumably a Russian drone exploded 40 kilometers away from Warsaw in the NATO territory. He's gonna use those hybrid provocations to kind of to raise the stakes and to make everyone anxious and nervous. But once again, I mean, I expect this war. My gut feeling is that I expect this war to, if not be over, then for us to kind of arrive at a more stable situation by the year's end.
So overall, looking forward, what would you say?
Like, look, I'm not predicting an outcome here. I'm just saying that for a number of reasons, and I can go into some of them briefly. It's the midterms in the US next year, and the political season pretty much starts in October. It's that meeting between Putin and the Chinese leadership in September. There are too many factors, and I think I don't think this war kind of has favorable kind of global environment for it to continue in 2026. But once again, it's just a gut feeling, and maybe it's wishful thinking. I'm Ukrainian after all, in Kiev.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Trump Report today.
No problem. Thank you. See you soon.